Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. Today I'm filming my March wrap up. So this month I read a total of 9 books, which for some people might be a lot, but for me it was actually kind of low. However, I think just because of how this month has planned out, we all know what's going on. I think we're all making exceptions for how our reading's going. Some people might be doing really well. I think a lot of people have been talking about how, despite the fact that we have so much time at home, we're still kind of a little off put by everything, so we're probably just like not reading. I feel like a lot of people are just kind of sitting down staring at a wall and like thinking, what's going on, I don't know what to do. So that's kind of how I've been feeling really weird. So 9 books, not the worst, but I could do better. I know I could do better. So the first book I read was a continuation from last month, and it's called Broken Veil by Jeff Wheeler. This is the 5th book in his Harbinger series. The Harbinger series is actually one series in a universe of books that he's written. So Broken Veil is the 5th and last book of the series, and I thought it ended so well. I gave it 5 out of 5 stars. Jeff Wheeler is a small indie author. I'm not sure if he's self-published or if he does have a publisher. It's probably a small publisher, but I absolutely loved his work. I think I've only ever seen one person either review it on Goodreads or talk about it on their YouTube channel. The Harbinger series takes place in a fantasy world where there's this huge divide between classes. The elite and wealthy live in like flying, floating cities, islands in the sky, and the poor live on the ground, and they're called the Fells. The wealthy literally look down on the poor, and the poor have no opportunity to move up in class. So one of our main characters, Seti, comes from the world below. She's an orphan and she's had a terrible upbringing. So our main character, Seti, is obsessed with how the magic of this world works. This is the magic that holds up these islands in the sky. Unfortunately for her, this is privileged information. The magic is called the Mysteries because most people don't know how it works. Even some people within the wealthy class don't know how it works. Fortunately for Seti, she does get the opportunity to leave her orphanage and go live with a very privileged family high up in the sky. Our other main character, Serafina, she's actually the granddaughter of the current emperor. Unlike most of her peers, Sarah's actually a very sweet girl. Most of the other people within her society are actually really rude and look down very, very terribly on the people from the Fells. Sarah knows that one day she will be empress because it's a thing of lineage. There's no elections. So Sarah wants to be the best empress for all her people, not just the wealthy elite class. So I can't go into detail about the 5th book because so much has happened. It kind of reminds me of like the beginning of like Harry Potter and how that story panned out. You couldn't expect anything that happened in book 7 just based on what happened on book 1. So much has happened. There's so much intrigue. There's a school setting. There's an assassin school setting. So much has happened. One thing that I really loved about this series is that there was no clear path for our heroes to take. There wasn't like this is the bad guy and this is how we're going to defeat the bad guy, so we just have to go and do that and then save the world. There were so many points with it throughout the series that I was like, what are we supposed to do, or what are our heroes supposed to do? There's so many paths that they could take that most of them aren't like the chosen path. Like, this is the way that we're gonna get through this unscathed. Each choice had its own fallbacks, and it was just so overwhelming to read, but like overwhelming in a good way. There was a little bit of romance, which I didn't mind. I thought the romance played itself well. I do want to say that the story starts off when they're 12, and as they age up, I think the story ends when they're like 19, 20. Seti and Sarah are the same age. While I was reading the story, it was important for me to remember that when the story started, that these girls are 12 and 13 years old and they have so much pressure put on them. So when they did make mistakes, like very obvious mistakes, I couldn't like blame them for it. You know what I mean? Because they're so young, they're children. I really want more people to read the series. It's so good. Jeff Wheeler doesn't get enough attention, but he totally deserves it. This series was so good. It's a series within a larger universe of series, so I'm really looking forward to picking up his other ones. Yeah, 5 out of 5 stars. The whole series was fantastic. I loved it. I would love to read it already. So the next book I read was unfortunately a DNF. I usually don't like to DNF books. It's not part of my personality. I'm a completionist. So if I do put down a book midway through, I'm always going to be asking myself, well, how does that storyline end? How does that storyline end? Unfortunately, I couldn't continue on in this case. So the book that I DNF'd was, unfortunately, The Land of Stories, The Wishing Spell by Chris Colfer. So this is a middle grade fantasy. It's about a set of twins who fall into a storybook. The storybook contains the stories that we're familiar with Cinderella, Snow White, Little Red, so on and so forth. The entirety of the book, they are trying to get back home. So in order to get back home, these children have to collect a bunch of items in order to cast the spell. So the reason why I couldn't continue on with this book was because when I pick up a fairy tale reimagining, because it's not a retelling, these fairy tale characters are in this book, I'd like these characters to be different than what I'm familiar with. So the fairy tale characters that we come across here have the same storyline that we're familiar with either the other children's books or like the Disney movies. There's nothing new brought to the table, so that was kind of a letdown for me. Another thing about this book is that it's on the younger side of middle grade. Everything is very like audience aware. Every time that our characters came across some sort of issue or problem, they pretty much solved it right then and there. There was really no anticipation or build up. I hope I'm not coming across too hard because this is a middle grade book, but I think we've all read, or at least I've read, a fair few within this age range where the author does kind of have subtleties and nuances for his readers, even if his readers are supposed to be 12 or 13. Yeah, it was just kind of disappointing. So at around 200 pages, I had to put it down. It's fairly thick for a middle grade. I did skip forward to the end and I read what the twist was, and it was pretty obvious as well. Obviously, this book wasn't for me, but I do like reading middle grade. Middle grade makes me feel happy, makes me feel optimistic. Unfortunately, while I was reading this book, I was just waiting for the action to start, waiting for something exciting to happen, but every time we came to a problem again, it was pretty much solved right then and there. So the next book that I finished is actually a reread, and that is Nevernight by J. Kristoff. So if you don't know what the series is about, it's about a young woman named Mia. She's about 16 when the story starts, but it's definitely not YA. It's very mature. The story has a lot of violence, it has a lot of gore, it has a lot of profanity and sexual content, even though the character is a teenager. So in this story, we follow Mia, who's trying to get revenge for her family who were killed by members of the ruling theocracy in her country. In this book, she goes to an assassin school to get the proper training in order to do the things that she wants to do. I mentioned already this is a reread, 5 out of 5 stars. I absolutely love this book. I remember reading this book the first time and being so engrossed with the characters, with this world. I also love the footnotes that are in this book. I think some people had a problem with that, but I love reading footnotes. Throughout my university life, I had to read tons of books with tons of footnotes, so it wasn't a problem for me. I still love everything about this book. However, during this reread, I found myself getting kind of annoyed by something that happened towards the end. So without spoilers, towards the end of the book, Mia does something in order for her to move on ahead in her studies. I can't say what it is, though you probably, like, if you read this book, you know what I'm talking about. She does something, and because of that, one of her classmates gets hurt. Mia has no problem with this. The classmate that got hurt was kind of anyways, but one of her friends comes up to her and tells her, why would you do something like that? That's terrible. That kind of confused me because one of the requirements to get into this assassin school is to kill someone. So going into this book, we know that every character is pretty much morally gray. There's no sweet cinnamon roll too pure for this world. Everyone's doing stuff for themselves. So I really didn't like that this friend came up and told her how suspect that was, that she put another person's life in danger in order for her to move forward in her studies. I don't think the reader is supposed to have a problem with her doing shady shit. However, at the same time, towards the end of the book, so many characters are telling Mia, oh, you're too good for this place, it's turning you into a different person, blah blah blah, and I'm kind of confused as to what we, the reader, are supposed to feel. Are we supposed to feel worried that Mia is changing, or are we supposed to kind of ignore that and say she's doing really well? Like, I just didn't really know what to feel. So other than that, I still really enjoy this book. I'm actually going to read the sequel, God's Grave, next month for the Owl's Magical Readathon. So the next book I read was actually probably my favorite this month. It's a book that I see like in people's like backgrounds in their videos, or sometimes I see it like on Bookstagram, but it's never really like the focus of their conversation, and that is Ink and Bone by Rachel Caine. This is the first book in the Great Library series. Rachel Caine is the same author as I think it's the Morganville Vampire series. I never read that when we were in like our vampire renaissance, like Twilight era. But I do know that she writes a lot. I've actually read some books by Rachel Caine and didn't realize it was Rachel Caine. The Great Library series is set in an alternate history fantasy world where the Great Library of Alexandria never burned down. As a result, this world cherishes books and literacy and academics. I think all bookish people would like to imagine what would the world look like if we put books and literature and academics at the forefront of our community, of our culture, as opposed to things like the military or economics. And this world takes that concept and turns it up to 100. Because books are so cherished that most people in the world are not allowed to own physical books. In order to borrow books from the library, you essentially request them and they send them to you via like ebook on like their version of a Kindle. Because books are such a commodity, that means there's going to be a demand for it, and we have the rise of black markets. So our main character Jess, his father runs a black market exchange for books. Jess has no interest in the criminal life. He doesn't care for it at all, even though he's been groomed for it, but he deals with this because he gets access to so many books. However, one day his father comes up to Jess and tells him, look, I know you don't want to do this, but you still need to pay your way. So Jess's father tells him, I want you to take the entrance exam to be a scholar for the Great Library. So you can probably expect that Jess does really well on his entrance exam and he moves forward in the application process. So the book narrows it down to about 30 people, and they all get sent to the actual Great Library in Alexandria. So this book does take place in Egypt. So we have a little bit of a competition slash academic school setting now. So this competition is definitely not like at Hunger Games level, but there is the chance that these students or scholars in training do get hurt, and some people do get hurt. The Great Library in this book has basically become this like overbearing entity upon the world. Every major city has a branch of the library in it. The way the Great Library influences politics and culture kind of reminds me of how the Catholic Church used to be in its heyday. I think if you like books about books, which is really trendy right now, you might like this. I would also say that if you love history or you're like a history nerd, I have my bachelor's in history. I absolutely adore this because there are so many historical elements within an alternate history novel that I was completely floored. I thought it was so rich in that. I loved it so much. I think I gave this 4.5 or 4 out of 5 stars. There was a little bit of a romance that I didn't think came about naturally. I think some characters also made some choices that they wouldn't have otherwise made, but I think the author needed to move the story along, so that was a little bit of a letdown. So other than those little gripes, I really love the story. I think it's fantastic. The premise is so unique. I'm so glad I picked up the sequel before this whole corona nonsense happened. So the next book I read was actually an ARC, so thank you so much to Delacorte Press for giving me the opportunity over on NetGalley, and that was All the Pretty Things by Emily Arsenault. So this ARC is about a young woman named Ivy, and her father owns the local amusement park that actually employs a good chunk of her town. One day, while Ivy is out of town, her best friend, finds the body of a boy that works at the amusement park with both of them. So very quickly, most of the community just assumes that this boy fell to his death because he has special needs, so people kind of just assumed, oh, he had an accident, he should have been walking alone. However, Ivy kind of feels that people are keeping secrets from her. Her best friend isn't telling her much. Her best friend actually pulls a stunt after finding their friend's body and lands in the mental institution. So this book has that trope where it's like a small town, so everyone kind of knows each other's secrets, or they're keeping secrets. I read this book in one day. It is very fast paced, but there were just some things that I thought were just average. Our main character has little to no personality. I didn't think anyone really kind of stood out. The only character that I was like interested in only had like a few pages of screen time. So very early on from the beginning, there wasn't really much of a mystery. I kind of knew who had a hand in all the drama that was going on. And then there was a reveal towards the end of this book that I thought was very lackluster. When they told me what had happened, I was kind of like, oh, okay, I guess that makes sense. But it wasn't like dramatic or like shocking. It was like, oh, that kind of just sucks. So yeah, I gave this book 3 out of 5 stars. It's not bad. If you've never read like a YA mystery, you can pick this up. There's nothing wrong with it. It was just kind of lackluster. So the next book I read, I don't have much to add to the discourse because I think everyone has their opinion on it, and that is Throne of Glass by Sarah J. Maas. So y'all know what the story's about. I don't have to explain it, but I do want to say, well, first of all, 4 out of 5 stars. So there's that. I had so much fun reading this. It was really entertaining. I know that some people, when they don't like this book, they really don't like it. So much so that sometimes they bash the author, which is really unfortunate because if you don't like the book, you don't like the book, but you don't have to go for the author. I'm not saying every critic does that, but I do think some do, which is terrible. But even some people who do love the series may say stuff like, it's cheesy, it's not that deep, it's trashy, whatever. So I kind of assume, going off of the critics and the people who love the series, that it was kind of like a Twilight of the high fantasy genre, that's just my assumption. Yeah, I thought it was fine. It's better than Twilight. I can totally see where some people might say that this is pretty average in terms of fantasy. I totally get that. None of the characters were really amazing. The plot isn't amazing. The romance is probably the worst part of this book. I didn't really care for it at all. But yeah, it was just really fun. I have nothing to add to the conversation. If you like the series, you like it. If you don't, you don't. If you think it's meh, then it's meh. Yeah, I enjoyed it, and I already have a second book. So the next book I read is Dead to the World by Charlaine Harris. This is the fourth book in the Sookie Stackhouse series. This is the series that inspired the True Blood television show. So I know that this series is pretty cheesy. It's about a world where vampires have come out of the coffin. That's like the phrase they use. And they're now out in public, and that causes, changes in culture. And the series follows a young woman named Sookie, and she's always getting into trouble with these vampires. The series also has like shapeshifters, werewolves, witches, I think fairies at some point. I'm not totally sure. If you've read urban fantasy, then this is the epitome of it. It's cheesy, it's dramatic, it's sexual, it's violent, it's vulgar. So I usually try to pick up books like this between like heavy fantasy or hard-hitting contemporaries, just to kind of cleanse the palate, in a literary sense. But yeah, 3 out of 5 stars. It's nothing fantastic, but if you're just looking to be entertained, like mindless fun, then books like this are perfect for that. And I really need that sometimes. So the next book is kind of like a hidden gem, and that is Child of a Hidden Sea by A.M. Della Monica. So this is a portal fantasy that I've never heard anyone talk about, which is kind of shocking. So this book is about a 20-some-year-old named Sophie who was adopted, and at some point she decides to find her birth mother. So when she finds her birth mother tells her that she wants nothing to do with her, to get out of her life. Sophie can't really let go that easily. One day sees that her aunt is visiting her mother, and during this visitation her aunt gets mugged in an alley by a group of men. And so when Sophie intervenes, she gets transported into this fantasy world. This fantasy world is not like the typical like Pangea-esque nation that you see in a lot of fantasy worlds. So this fantasy world is actually comprised of a bunch of island nations, which I really enjoyed. I don't come across fantasy books like that a lot, so you can probably assume that things like navy and sailing is a big part of this world, and it is. There is a little bit of political intrigue that happens because Sophie's family is somewhat connected to politics, but I think the core themes of this novel is straight up adventure. It's about Sophie experiencing this new world that she's a part of. Sophie's having so much fun in this world, just documenting the flora and the fauna that she's coming across. She's an adventurer at heart. Sometimes when a character walks through a portal and is in this new world, I just want them to experience it because I want to experience it myself. I love that escapism, and that's what Sophie is experiencing. The magic system is really unique. I did hear a review that it was similar to Terry Pratchett's Discworld. I'm not sure how accurate that is, but I'm just throwing that out there. I have no other way to explain this book other than it was just really fun. Like, it's fun. There were also a lot of moments in this book where I was kind of like having flashbacks to my anthropology classes at university, because one of the things that's present in this book is the culture shock that Sophie is receiving. She wants to know how this world works. She wants to know the culture of every single island nation that exists within this world. She wants to know why one island has totally foregone marriage and monogamy, and their neighbors, which you would imagine would be very similar in mindset, are actually very sexually stunted, and they're very conservative and like homophobic. So yeah, if you just want like a pure like adventure novel, I would say this is it. And the last book I read was Balance on the Blade's Edge by Lindsay Broker. So Lindsay Broker is a small indie author. I believe she is self-published, and I think she has most, if not all, of her books on Kindle Unlimited. So sure on that, but I've gotten a lot of her books on Kindle Unlimited, and I've won a fair few on like Goodreads giveaways. She writes mostly sci-fi fantasy, and the books that I've read from her are, I would say, sci fantasy with like steampunk elements. So I've read like 4 or 5 of her books before, and I think they're so entertaining, kind of like the Sookie Stackhouse like urban fantasy type novels. These sci fantasy novels kind of do the same thing for me. They're just mindless fun, and I don't mean that in a bad way. Sometimes I just want to pick up a book and not have to worry about like annotating or like what's like the deeper message. I just want something again, a palate cleanser between books. I think she does that very well for me. I almost always exclusively give her books 3 stars. Again, it's not a bad thing. So this particular book is the first in the Dragon Blood series. So this book starts off with a sorceress who goes into hiding in a bunker with a bunch of other magic users. Her country is being invaded, so these mages, other sorcerers, group up together and hide. The next time that our main character wakes up, 300 years have passed. The bunker that she went into hibernation in is actually now being used by the military as a mining operation, and all the other miners are actually criminals, rapists, cons, whatever. So the world that she wakes up in is also very anti-magic. Before they were appreciated and respected, and now they're pretty much hunted down. This world also has a lot of sci-fi elements. It introduces things like automatic rifles and, like, I would say, like, helicopters and like early versions of like aircraft, like planes, which is something that our main character has no idea what it is. She just sees a giant mechanical object in the sky and she like freaks out. So our other main character is actually the general who's in charge of this mining operation. He's been put in charge as a punishment because he punched a diplomat in the face. So both of these characters meet and a romance happens, but they also help each other out. Obviously, our sorceress needs to get out of this terrible situation. This was a pretty short book. I think it was like 230 pages, and I have the next 2 because I got them in a bundle. So yeah, those are all the books I've read. I'm hoping to read much more next month. I'm participating in the Owls, and I have some other stuff I need to read, other arcs. So thanks for watching. Please feel free to like, comment, and subscribe. Let me know what you read this month. What was your favorite? What was your least favorite? And I'll see you on the next one. Peace out.